Hey, what's up, guys? It's MetaGamesGX here, and we are going to be checking out the best 10 budget decks this new format. You guys really liked the last time we did this, so we're going to do it again. And there's a bunch of new decks on this list, so I hope you guys leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. So let's get right into it. So, of course, we have Sky Striker at number 10 because this is the deck that Ryan Yu recently topped with. This is not the exact same list. However, I still think it's one of the best decks, you know, in general for a budget list. All these decks are under $150, which I consider to be a budget range for Yu-Gi-Oh! This deck in particular being $100. The board breakers, I mean, the most expensive card in this deck is like probably Forbidden Droplet or Infinite Impermanence, and this deck can break any board in the whole game. And this is why Ryan Yu took second at the most recent YCS Niagara this year, when he took this deck in a brand new meta and completely crushed it when people completely wrote it off. So I think that taking this budget variant is very much going to net you a lot of success if you just learn the combo lines, learn how to break the boards with Striker, and learn how the different matchups. So that's the very important part about Striker. It's a very technical deck when it comes down to it. Also SP Lil Knight now being reprinted really does help, you know, builds like this. Of course, you can skip out on the Azalea because that one is also not exactly needed and it's kind of expensive. Next at number 9, we have Sprite. Now, Sprite has been a deck that has been doing a lot, you know, ever since it came out, and it's still rummaging around and netting a few regional tops here and there. It even won a YCS a couple formats ago. Now, this list in particular is, of course, the Ice Barrier list, which techs basically one Mirror Mage to basically facilitate the Swap Frog engine, so you can get free rank 2 access essentially. And all you need is the Sprite engine, you know, your one of Mirror Mage, and the Nimble Beaver engine. All these cards being very, very cheap. The Sprite starter, you just end up learning, you know, the combo lines, how to set up these really big boards, because Sprite, of course, loves to build huge boards that your opponent really cannot play through. They're very layered, and, you know, even a Dark Ruler does it. You, of course, have things like Sprite Double Cross, or this build runs the Angel Statue Azurine on top of the Silhouette Rabbit, which is probably the more expensive part about this deck. This deck is $145, so it's definitely a little bit more expensive. You could probably cut the Silhouette Rabbit. However, the SP Lil Knight is now dirt cheap on top of, you know, interesting picks such as the Mannequin Cat, so you could turbo out Christia depending on the situation, which is quite cool to prevent your opponent from special summoning any monsters. This deck also runs a Triple Tactics Thrust, which, you know, now just got reprinted out of the Rarity Bonanza, so a lot of things have now been reprinted, which is kind of why I felt like making a video on this, because I thought that a lot of new reprints mean that, you know, a lot of these lists are going to be going down in price. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gone a lot cheaper, so that's what we love to see. This deck struggles going second, however, I think you can compensate with the non-engine and then, of course, the board breaking package. Next, we have Purrely, which is a deck from, you know, months and years past that has been one of the best contenders. It, you know, is one of the best turn 1 decks. It can make an X Purrely Noir that lets you net a couple draws and have a 4,300 defense and basically be completely unaffected by all other card effects, which is extraordinarily difficult for most decks to get around. Now, it's definitely taken some hits, with Purrely Delicious Memory and Purrely Sleeping Memory both being at 2 respectively, each in the TCG, of course. But, you know, despite those hits, it's still one of the better decks. It can also main deck a Dimensional Shifter at 3 and basically be completely fine, since you can still set multiple interruptions. And you see builds like this running kashtira Fenrir, which is probably the most expensive card in this build in particular. Build being $137, also running Triple Tactics Talents, Power Prosperity, and Dimensional Fissure to stop any graveyard-based deck. So you really have a, you know, you have tons of non-engine, but you also have a ton of graveyard hate between the Shifter and the D-Fissure, so a lot of the decks that have tons of gas, that can outgas Purrely nowadays, really have to, you know, be careful about what they do, and you can net a lot of free games just from the main deck of Shifter. Of course, other notable cards would be Zeus, which is like a $10 card, but you kind of need it for the OTK purposes. That's kind of non-negotiable. Interesting cards such as Fugo, because this is nice for the Tenpai matchup, so, you know, things like Droplet probably are a bit more, you know, debatable, but, you know, things like SP Lil Knight now being reprinted means that this deck is going to be very good at a very budget level. Next, we have everybody's favorite bird deck, Floowandereeze. This deck will not die, of course. As long as Robina is legal, this deck will still be kicking. So we've still seen a few regional tops here and there with the M-Pen and Friends engine with 3 Shifter, and of course main decking the Harpy's Featherstorm. This deck is also dirt cheap, coming in around $98. So you love to see it, especially now that Triple Tactics Thrust, a main staple in a deck that can thrust out a Harpy's Featherstorm under a hand trap and still provide basically a complete turn skip on your opponent's turn. You know, this card's now very cheap, so I think that that really does help this kind of deck pop off and be more of a budget-friendly variant. You know, we have 2 Zeus, 1 Typhon, which these are definitely more of the expensive lot. I don't think they're necessary, though. Like, these are completely optional. You never go into cards like these in Floowandereeze, which would automatically take this deck down to like a $50 build automatically, so... of course, this deck is great at breaking boards because you can main deck things like Thrust, and then also, you know, evenly matched, Dark Ruler No More, Triple Tactics Talents. This deck doesn't run hand traps, but, you know, Flu has been known to run hand traps. You know, this build particularly is siding them, so you love to see it. You know, this deck is great at going first and setting up M-Pen, preventing your opponent from using any really monster effects that are special summon in attack position, but also then making them play into Ryza and Miss Valley Apex Avian looping plays, so you'll love to see it. And number 5, we have Melodious, which is a deck that got kind of hit with the prosperity limit, but some builds have been topping regionals lately using Pot of Desires as a replacement, which this deck just, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to see all of its cards. It just needs to resolve its engine once, and then it's really kind of in a winning position, I feel like, if you have a lot of non-engine to back it up, which the Pot of Desires helps get to. In this deck, there's no real card that's over a few dollars in the main deck. Really does shine because Melodious has one of the most malleable, you know, engines that you can take into other decks, but on top of that, it could also just be a very consistent end board that sets up multiple bounces on top of a rank 4, which could be a Baguska, or multiple banishes from the graveyard in Schuberta, which just got reprinted, so this deck is even more cheap. On top of that, you could run SP Little Knight too if you wanted to. Ostinado has now been reprinted into the ground, so this deck is, you know, very dirt cheap, and it's great at going first, but it's also fantastic at going second because it's able to run Herald of the Orange Light, which is just gamma for the deck. It allows you to negate a monster effect and then destroy the monster. It's very good in that respect, since all the main deck Melodious monsters are fairy types. Next at number 3, you have Ritual Beast, which has been really making a huge impact on the meta, coming very close to winning a few YCSs now. And the deck only clocks in at $130 overall, with cards like Spiritual Beast, Tamer Lara just coming out, giving the deck a whole new life, allowing your combo lines to go infinite and create really good onboards, and then also go into things like, you know, Thunder Dragon Colossus and Protos through the rank 4 access of Infernal Flame Banshee, setting up then also interruptions through the Ritual Beast Steeds, and then also going into Ulti Gaia Pelio. The deck is very good, honestly. I think it loses a lot to Mulcharmy, which is something we're going to talk about with these next few decks, because this is not one of the best decks. Because this deck is not the first or second best deck, because the fact it can't play into Mulcharmy very well, and that's why Virtual Beast has been seeing a little bit of a hard time. You know, the Impulse also becoming in the meta also does hurt this deck, but Mulcharmy especially, this deck has basically no Mulcharmy lines. It kind of loses on either Purrely or Fuwalos, especially Fuwalos, you know, removing the effect to special summon off of the Lara or your extra deck where you're looping the Ulti Kanahawk in order to set boards. But however, this deck is still very solid and has been topping regionals even despite the card being in the meta. But, you know, I've seen a lot of long-time Ritual Beast players leave this deck, but we've seen new ones also come into the fold. So, you know, if you dedicate yourself to this deck, I think that you will have a good time with it, and it's also a great budget option. It just struggles going second, but that's why this deck can run things like board breakers like Book of Eclipse, Triple Tactics Talents, and Infinite Impermanence with Ash Blossom. And of course, it's a shifter deck, so it's going to be very good no matter what. And number 3, we have Branded Despia. Branded Despia is one of my favorite decks, of course, as you guys know, so I'm a little biased. However, it's had a few tops between the Rio de Janeiro, or the Guadalquivir YCS that just happened, and then also a few regional tops also. This deck is great for playing into Mulcharmy because you have things like Nadir Servant, which allows you to go one card full combo with only giving your opponent one draw under Mulcharmy. It has a much better Mulcharmy, you know, game plan than things like Ritual Beast does, so that's why I ranked it a little bit higher. It's also very untouched. A lot of people have kind of just dropped the deck, but I think it's still very good. People just picked up the deck and played it. Obviously, you know, Dominus Impulse is now in the meta on top of Ash Blossom, which negates your Branded Fusion. However, the deck has been so much more than Branded Fusion for a long time now, so obviously if you're running things like a Stellar, TEARLAMENTS Shiren, and then multiple Cartesias and Quem, you can get the job done with things like Nadir Servant, extra fusion duplications, and now that Triple Tactics Thrust is very budget, it's going to be a great option for you to try out, for all you budget players to try out. Branded is one of the best going first games, being able to set up a gimmick puppet lock, which essentially tells your opponent that they can't special summon for the whole turn. I know, fun, but it's still one of the best for going first turns that you need to respect, and also one of the reasons to play the deck. You can play through infinite hand traps with this deck too. However, things like I said, Impulse and Ash really do hurt this deck, which is currently a part of the best decks in Tenpai and Fire King at the moment, so you do have to be careful about that. But when you aren't going against Impulse.deck, this deck feels like the best deck in the room, so it's definitely something to... And number 2, we have Stun. It could be the Stun Runic variants or even the other ones, but I think the Stun Runic variant is one of the best ones. We've actually seen multiple tops post ROTA where this deck, which clocks in at only $100 about, running the Runic engine, which has been reprinted into the ground on top of spicy stuff in this build, like the Performa Pal 5 Rainbow Magician, and then also the Inspector border, still manages to get multiple tops. Even though Skill Drain's at 1, Goes and Matches at 1, Rivalry of Warlords at 1, you have things like D-Fissure and Time Tearing Morganite to help pick up the pace, and then also the Runic engine to help with the card advantage. Now, I think this deck still has a lot of gas, even with Skill Drain limited, and now the deck is very cheap. There's not very many expensive cards. You can run SP Little Knight now. Typhon's probably the most expensive card, and also it has great matchups. You know, going first, it can side any floodgate in the game. It just kind of sucks going second, but obviously if it's your day, it's your day, and it's a very, you know, it's kind of a mindless deck, so it allows you to just turn off your mind and have a good time and see if you can, you know, just beat your opponent with some good old stun. Still Tenpai Dragons with the limit of Sangan summoning. However, this deck still proves to be one of the best decks in the meta. It's arguably the best deck in the meta, but I think overall it's still very much a glass cannon. Also, people have been running Dominus Impulse in this deck in the Mulcharmies. You don't really need to, and there's been actually multiple lists topping without the Mulcharmies. You can still run hella board breakers and hella hand traps, and this deck just does the same thing. I think the board breakers were always the best part about Tenpai, the fact you can just main deck a bunch of Raigeki and Darkhole and just wipe out your opponent's board and then go Tenpai Dragon Pydra and basically just win the game. I think that's, you can still do that without those very expensive cards, and you've seen multiple duelists get multiple regional tops now with budget Tenpai lists, this list clocking in at about $140 itself. Athia Princess now being reprinted on top of plenty of other cards. I think that, you know, Black Rose Dragon, the Odd Eyes Meteor Burst Dragon, the Bident, and now the Trident Dragon has been reprinted, so very much so this deck is not that much expensive anymore. I think Pydra might be the most expensive card in this deck, and it's a shifter deck, so very good on that angle. You see this deck also running the Santa Claus, which is kind of interesting. I saw that it was kind of spicy, but overall Tenpai is performing, and that's why I have to give it the best budget deck of this format. So if you're looking for the best budget deck and what to play, it's definitely Tenpai. You can just drop the Dominus Impulses, drop the Mulcharmies, and go blind second with Tenpai. You could also do a going first build, but that requires a little different stuff. To do that, I'd recommend checking out some of the YCS lists to do that. But overall, that Tenpai can still just break so many boards. It has such a good matchup into Snake Eye, which is one of the best decks. It can also just blow out Fire King with Shifter, so it's just overall very good matchup without Yubel in the game as much anymore. So did you guys agree with my list? Did I miss any decks on the top 10 list for the best budget list of this format? I went through all of the topping regional NYCS lists that were under $150 and came up with this list on top of just using my personal editorial on top of that, because of course I play the game every day and numbers don't always tell the whole picture. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a like down below, and of course comment. Check out all the links, become a member today, and we'll be seeing you guys later. Make sure you're subscribed for more great Yu-Gi-Oh content.